Hello and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Marcus Sedberry at Baylor University. I'm so thankful for the transformational experience of the NCAA Dr. Charles Whitcomb Leadership Institute. The program was one of the most challenging and rewarding leadership experiences I've ever been a part of. It gave me hands-on strategic planning and career mapping experience. It challenged me to grow personally and equipped me with tangible skills for my professional career. But most of all, it gave me a family of industry experts with shared experiences that I can lean on at any time. Always remember, be loved and be you. Enjoy the episode.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. Just a quick note before we begin. This conversation was recorded prior to Josh Heird being named as interim athletics director. Enjoy the episode. Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, and review 1Q wherever you listen to podcasts. Today, I am on campus at University of Louisville. I am joined by Josh Heird. Josh is the Deputy Athletics Director, and Amy Calabrese, who is the Associate Athletics Director and Senior Woman Administrator. Greetings. Thanks for joining me here on 1Q.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Ty.
I'm looking at the facilities here, and they look very nice. I'm glad to be inside because it feels like it's 135 degrees outside, and you don't want to melt before I got up the stairs, right? So I want to talk to you guys. Now, you guys have a background that goes back kind of far, I guess, back to being graduate assistants together, right? Working on the MBA.
We do. We met 07?
August of 07.
August of 07. We were in the same MBA program here at U of L, and then we're coworkers and shared an office that's probably about, 5 feet long?
Yeah.
2 feet wide?
Yes.
A lot of quality time together in those early years.
Yeah, I wonder about did you guys work in the industry first before getting the MBA, or was it right out of college, or what was the process there?
I came right out of college. So I actually was a student athlete here, graduated, finished my career, and then started my MBA immediately after graduating.
And being a few years older than Amy, I spent 5 years on Capitol Hill out of college, working for a congressman and a senator before I wised up and realized I wanted to do something outside of the political world.
And that was both of you. I guess so it was both of you guys' start in college athletics post the MBA, which is interesting. I wonder about the conversations as a graduate assistant, thinking about the future in 2007, 2008. You try to speculate on where you're going to be and how things are going to look. And things seem like they probably look way different than you guys would have thought back when you were working on your MBA. I wonder I ask these questions because I'm working on my MBA, right? And so I wonder, when you go through these classes, am I going to use some of the things that are taught to me now as an MBA student? Will they be valuable to me, or am I just getting 3 letters after my name? So help me understand that in terms of an MBA.
Yeah, I would say it's both. That's the one thing that I always tell people as they're getting into the industry or thinking about going to school, post bachelor's degree is absolutely go get a master's degree. It may not necessarily open any additional doors, but it definitely closes some if you don't have it, because it's getting to be a prerequisite, a minimum qualification for AD level jobs, senior level leadership jobs. So absolutely, I think that's one piece of it. The other piece of it for me, being a history major, is I use a lot of the information from my MBA. I use it, I would say, daily, quite frankly.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. What about you, Amy?
I would say as I've ascended, I've used it more. So starting out, obviously I was entry level. I started off in life skills. I didn't use too much of the MBA knowledge right off the bat. But as I've gained management, I've gained responsibility, I'm more involved with our financials and some other decision making, I revert back to a lot of that foundation from the MBA. Really? So if it's not useful right now, it will be at some point. Have faith.
I probably need to study a little harder to make sure I retain some of the stuff. I mean, I have a master's degree already, but I don't remember anything from it.
Here's the one thing I think Amy and I learned more than any other thing in our MBA program. Does the marginal benefit outweigh the marginal cost?
There you go.
Yes.
All day, right?
We paid a lot of money to learn that line, but it's to Amy's point, we use it a lot as we're sitting there knocking ideas around and, hey, what are we doing here? What are we doing there? Can you try to answer that question?
Yeah, I actually sitting through economics class, I'm like, I want to think like this for all aspects of life, right? That's kind of what I wanted to do. And so somebody was like, you probably do, you just don't know it in terms of economics. Thinking about your role, Amy, you said you started off in life skills, right? Mm-hmm. And that has iterated a number of times since back in 2008, 9 or something like that. Now being associate athletic director, you have some sport oversight. You do a number of things on campus. You have your hands in a lot, right? There's a big knowledge area that you have to have when you talk about creating and maintaining an excellent student-athlete experience here on campus. I wonder about some of your thoughts on how things are progressing here in college athletics, or even specifically here at Louisville.
It has evolved a lot since 2007, 2008, much more holistic. Okay. I think we've seen, with name, image, and likeness, a whole new dynamic come into our programming for the athletes. And really, Alyssa Murphy, our assistant AD, oversees our student athlete development program, does a fantastic job. But it's, when I started life skills was a little bit more of softer type of items, so to speak, a little financial literacy, whatnot. It has just evolved so much to be, almost a little bit of a boot camp to some degree in kind of business savviness with your name, image, likeness, with how you're trying to set yourself up when you graduate and whatnot. So it is definitely a big job to do. Mm-hmm. And it's also not something that we've talked a lot about here. It's not one person's job. Yeah. The coaches need to be on board, administrators, sports performance coaches. There's so many touch points around the athletes, and there's so many opportunities for that growth and development. And so really trying to make sure that we don't treat student athlete development as a silo. And even last year with the racial justice movement and everything else, it's not just this linear path anymore. Mm-hmm. It's so all-encompassing. Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thinking about your background, you've had some work in facilities. There's a lot of both of you guys. There's a lot of internal work, right? And when you'll have to correct me here. When I think of internal operations and internal affairs in the athletics department, I think of dealing a lot more with people. The people in the program, the people outside of the program on campus, and those types of things. And so when you think about internal, I know your background is working with Mark Jackson. And one of the things that he's big on is introspection and understanding who you are, right? Before you can go out and lead the world, learn how to lead yourself first, right? Yeah. Take the time, take the space and do it. Yeah. So I wonder if there's when you work under someone like that, does that carry on to what you're doing now in terms of the people you are around, lead, and work with and for here at Louisville when you talk about internal?
100%. Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard Mark say it, and Amy's heard me say it. It's taking the quiet time, right? And just trying to sort through who you want to be, who you are, how you lead an organization or a group of people. And self-reflection is, to me, the most important thing a leader can do, because I think it provides an opportunity for that leader to take a step back and say, hey, where did I go right? Where did I go wrong? How do I get better? But also do that from an organization standpoint too. And so I think that's one of the reasons Mark and I worked so well together. To this day is a very good friend. I actually talked to him this weekend. We stay in touch constantly, and his ability to lead was just, I learned so much from him in the 2.5 years that I was there. I'll be forever grateful for him giving me that opportunity. We didn't know each other when he hired me, and it was kind of a funny story. I just felt like I was ready to move on from here and do something new. And so there was an associate AD of finance posting for Villanova. And I'd gotten to know the basketball program because they were here for a regional in 2016, and I oversaw that regional. And so I'm like, look, I don't really have a background in finance. I'm just kind of taking a flyer here. We're going to see if we can get something.
MBA, though.
I do. See if we can get something to stick. And reached out to a couple members of their basketball staff. And that's the only reason Mark even looked at me. I think if he would have just looked at my resume and said, a facilities guy's applying for my associate AD of finance job, but that I would say got me in that shorter stack. And we started having a couple conversations. And as I said, he took a chance on me, and really, really thankful that he did.
Is that what you did for those couple of years? Did you do finance?
Yeah, so I oversaw the budget. That was one of the original responsibilities I had. And then he elevated me to COO, Chief Operating Officer, after about the first year there. And it was fun. I really, really enjoyed working at Villanova, but then had the opportunity to come back and work with a bunch of people I knew here. And so it's been good for me.
So the facilities background, what I know about facilities people, operations people, and event management people is that they are very, very detail oriented. And that's like, you can rub somebody the wrong way with having something out of place for a facilities guy. I wonder about that. How do you lead? If that's your background, there has to be some part of that in your leadership style now as a deputy athlete.
Yeah, there definitely was, as I was, and it's funny, I'm saying these things, and Amy's heard me say all these things. That's why I'm kind of laughing. There was when I was, as I deem them, a doer as opposed to a manager. And as you elevate and you become more of a manager than a doer, I think you have to learn to let some of those things go, right? Because everybody's going to do a job differently than how you're going to do it. And if you don't have the ability to let that go and say, hey, they've done a pretty good job here, you're just going to drive yourself mad and you're going to be a terrible leader.
Was that hard for you to do?
Not really, because I go back to that just quiet time and realizing, like, hey, everybody's going to do it differently than I do it, and I have to be comfortable with that. And as I always say, explain where we're at, explain to where we want to end up, and how you get there is irrelevant, right? It's, hey, get from A to Z. Your path's going to maybe look like an arc, mine's going to look like a straight line, but as long as we're in agreement on what the end result looks like, then let people do their job.
A friend of mine has a saying, evaluate me by my product, not my process.
Mm-hmm.
That's
a good one.
Unless the process is the product, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So I like that. It kind of fits in what you're saying there. Amy, the transition from being a student athlete to graduate assistant to working in student life skills, being that close to it. Like when I transitioned from an athlete to not an athlete anymore, I wonder how I would have been in terms of providing things to people who I was probably just with 2 years prior, right? Talk to me about that early on in your career when you talk about student athlete development.
Yeah, so it's something we talk about too with younger staff. We have an internship program here with GAs, is that there's a way to connect with student athletes and get respect and have a connection, and that's different from being on their same level and being liked by them, if that makes sense. I was always in a position, I'm an old soul, I would say, so I feel like I always was a little bit of the team mom anyway when I played, and so probably my maturity was a little bit more than maybe some other individuals, and so the transition wasn't, I think, as difficult for me because I had already established myself with my peers when I was a senior as a little bit, probably more of a leader. And I think it's just one of those things with younger staff is, we talk a lot about this with some of our new hires, our young athletic trainers. Being liked and being respected is very different. And that sounds simple, but the older you get, the more you realize that being respected is going to further your career. Right. And you can still have connections with your coworkers, with the student athletes, but you don't need to be on that same level as them all the time.
Right. And one of them has a little more influence in terms of leadership than the other, which is important. And now you find yourself interacting with different areas on campus, right, to help execute whatever it is you need to execute to make sure that the student athlete experience is well. Talk to me about the reception of campus to things you ask for. And I may be wrong, which is one of my premises, right? I may be wrong about a lot, but I may be wrong. But athletics, we can ask for a lot. We're trying to make the experience great. And sometimes campus is hesitant about some things. So tell me about that interaction with campus.
I think to your point, in athletics, we move at a faster speed oftentimes. Sometimes we have unique considerations. We definitely have more staff of the student athlete to staff ratio. So at times we can move faster. And so I think it always comes down to relationships, right? So how do we as senior staff have relationships with different individuals on campus? Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, if you're really trying to do the right thing and you explain where you're coming from and also understand the bigger picture of where university is coming from, usually you can find a compromise. Right. Or if you can give here, can we take there a little bit? And so big focus for us is being a good steward of the university and being a good team member, as cheesy as that sounds, but making sure that we're helping them and just as they can help us as we try to move forward on some issues as well.
You touched on something earlier, talking about NIL and talking about the evolution of college athletics. And this is kind of for both of you guys. There's a concept out there by a Harvard professor. Her name is Frances Fry, and she mentioned something that I thought was interesting, and it was called exhaustive mediocrity. And I have said that term in the last 3 conversations I've had, whether it be a video or a podcast, because I think it really applies to college athletics. And what it means is, like, if you are executing a strategy and then you plan for the next strategy and you start executing that strategy, and you have the best people in your organization you could possibly have, all in the right seats, and everybody's executing as hard as they can, but the product continues to be mediocre. You continue to have an output that is just not stellar. One of the reasons that she says is because people don't consider the strategic trade-offs, right? When strategizing or when executing new strategies, like, what are you, if you're going to keep putting things on our plate, what are you going to take off our plate so we can continue to execute forward? And so I think that applies to college athletics. From my outside looking in perspective, I mean, we're former athletes, understand sports is to continue to get better. How we can get better, we do what's necessary to execute at 110%. But at some point, we have to consider what the strategic trade-offs are. So I wonder about your guys' thoughts on that when you talk about NIL coming on, when you talk about wherever we go in college athletics.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, right? And as we mentioned a few minutes before the podcast got started, college athletics has never really needed to say, hey, we don't need this or we don't need that, right? It's just been, for lack of better terms, a growth industry from a revenue standpoint. Mm-hmm. And so you're always building for, to your point, the next best thing. But some of these things that weren't good or weren't great are still there. And somebody's doing them, to your point, probably at a pretty mediocre level. And I think the other thing you have to be aware of is the bandwidth of every staff member that you have. And so that's where, in my mind, you have to focus on what your priorities are. And at times that means eliminating certain things within your department. And I think COVID created, that had to happen, right? Didn't create it. It had to happen from a financial standpoint. And so a lot of programs kind of reset and said, okay, here's our real priorities. I know we did it, as we cut about $15 million out of our operating budget. Our student athlete experience was number one. How do we make sure we don't interfere with anything relative to the student athlete experience? And then we say, okay, what about this initiative, that initiative? Some of these, they weren't very important. They just weren't. And so we said, eliminate them. And we got better as an organization because of it.
Interesting. Amy, you have any thoughts?
Well, and I think it forced, to Josh's point, with COVID and rethinking some stuff, it also allows for innovation, right? And a time to reset. And, as you were speaking, Josh, what came to mind is, to your point, we did value the student-athlete experience. So we did not cut back on academic support. We did not cut back on athletic trainers, medical support. Mm-hmm. We did cut back on marketing creative services support. So that department for us probably took a 30% hit reduction in personnel and funding and whatnot. But it also allowed Lottie Stockwell, who's our head of creative services and marketing, she reimagined her whole staff, and now she builds it back up. I really think there's a new focus on being intentional. How do we work smarter? How do we, this is a simple example. Do we need video coverage at every single game? No, we don't, because we can take the ACC network feed, right? And so it allowed us to, again, how do we reimagine some things? How do we innovate? And so I think, at least I feel like at Louisville, and I think a lot of other athletic departments are going to come out stronger and more strategic out of COVID. Right. And so it, to your point, we had to look at bandwidth. We had to look at, it wasn't feasible to have a sports information director covering 6 sports. Like, that's not good for anyone's mental health. It's not good for work product. And that's also something we've tried to focus on a lot here the past 2 years is quality of life, mental health, not just our student athletes, but also our employees. Because as we all know, college athletics is an industry that you can run yourself ragged very quickly with the output that is expected.
So I was listening to NPR, and they were talking about investment bankers or something, and it's hard to hire staff. The new hires, the new entry-level people, while they might get paid nice, they're working 90-some hours a week. And now they're realizing we got to make some changes. And I bring that up to say the pandemic helped the college athletics and probably the entire country realize, okay, we got to make some changes. I wonder if there should be or is an aspect of maybe we need to reevaluate everything more often to see if we should be filtering things out or reimagining our department so that while there may be an excellent employee, they're probably not giving excellent output because they're probably worked to death or something like that. So I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think about? Like, how will you have another opportunity to evaluate everything like the pandemic gave us? I mean, without having that type of...
Without having another global...
Yeah, exactly right. Another history-making... Yeah.
But I think it goes back to conversations around leadership and organizations. I feel like they tend to be fairly circular, right? You go back to previous points. And for me, it goes back to that self-evaluation. If everybody in your organization is doing that, which is probably a little bit of a pipe dream, let's say your senior leaders are doing that, then the organization should be doing that almost daily, right? How do we get better? And, there's going to be those times where you all come together and say, all right, let's think through what we really need to focus on. But if you're not doing that on a daily basis, I would say, or I would contend that you don't have a great organization.
If that's not the culture in terms of let's figure out how are you doing? I mean, how are we doing? And this is not to take away from, I was a walk-on athlete, right? And so walk-ons, we try harder is my mantra, right? And so, we are going to try to give 111%, 112%. Okay, tomorrow, is there more percentage I can give, right? And so that's not to take away from overachieving, right? We are all probably overachievers. But there is an aspect of, at some point, we probably need to sit down and have a conversation and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing now. I've done it for the last 6 months, and I am not sleeping, and my eyes have turned stark red. Can you not see the red in my eyes right now from the, kind of situation? So I wonder, in the positions you guys are in, the people you work with, do you allow that type of organizational self-evaluation and organizational feedback in addition to the individual self-evaluation?
I do think we're getting better at that. We can always improve. I know some initiatives we've had at U of L is we hired a director of talent development position. That we're actually about to fill soon, but it was the first time we've ever had a position that's focused really on employee health and wellness, right, in athletics. Right. It's empowering people to take vacation time and encourage it, and it's not a stigma, so to speak, I think, which is happening in college athletics. And so I think we're trying to make small moves in that direction. But to Josh's point, making sure as a senior staff and senior leadership and those that are managing others is that it's almost like the quiet time you talked about, Josh, but taking it on an organizational level, quiet time, so to speak, to evaluate.
The only thing I would add there is I think every employee wants to feel valued within the organization. And that was something that Mark would always harp on, right? Do you enjoy coming to work? Or do you have, when you get in the car, leaving your house, do you already regret coming into the office? And if that's the case, then either you're doing something wrong or we're doing something wrong. And it's not going to help either of us if we don't address it. So he was so big on, as he would say, where do you want to go? Not 3 months from now, 6 months from now, but 5 years from now, where do you want to be? And let's help you get there. Right? And it may not be at Villanova or the University of Louisville, but let's put you on a path to get you where you want to go so that you're coming to work motivated every day. And that way you eliminate a lot of the going through the motions. And like I said, he was really good at making people feel valued because he cared about people's futures.
Right. Which is one of the most important things when you have an organization is that people feel valued. I'll ask this last question, then we'll wrap. Ensuring that your marginal utility is greater than your marginal cost, right? Something you said you guys took from the MBA program. Talk to me about the last time you actually considered that in something you were working on here at University of Louisville.
Probably the most recent example. Possibly the pep band reorg, maybe?
Yeah, and once again, going back to what we had just talked about, I think you're doing it constantly. There's a lot of things we're sitting here saying, is it worth it? Is it not? Let's look at the pros. Let's look at the cons. Let's look at the financial side of things. And so while we're sitting here kind of racking our brains as to what was the real last decision.
Right, we're always doing
Amy and I have these conversations all the time relative to staff. Whether it's and I'm going to throw some examples out there. Do our men's and women's golf team need a director of ops? Do we need to fill this position or that position after somebody left? Or can we be more strategic and say, hey, this person can take on some more responsibility, some things like that. And so I would say, once again, if you're in a good organization, you're doing it constantly.
Yeah, excellent. Amy, any input on that?
No, I'm just laughing because I feel like we talk to each other every day on the way into work at 8 a.m. our commute. That's our weekly or usually daily meeting. But it is that constant communication with your senior leadership. Is there something that we're not considering? And so to your point, it is either on a micro or macro level every day. You're kind of making a decision.
But having that lens is an excellent lens.
I think having the lens to something for us too is having your core values that you can point back to, because especially during COVID, there's a lot of times when we got into arguing with senior staff about this and that because all of us have our own perspective, and to have these, I'll say, net neutral core values. Okay, student athlete experience is at the top of the list. Athletic trainers directly affect student athlete experience. Maybe this department doesn't affect it as much. Right. So having that North Star, so to speak, helps.
It's very important. Well, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you guys allowing me to be here. It sounds like you guys are constantly evolving and improving through whatever lens you're looking at to do it, whether it be self-introspection or whether it be introspection as an organization as a whole. And I've enjoyed our conversation here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Ty, for having us.
Thanks, Ty.
That was Josh Heird. He's the Deputy Athletics Director. And Amy Calabrese, she is the Associate Athletics Director and Senior Woman Administrator here at University of Louisville. And of course, I'm Ty Brown with one question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today.
This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.